Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host on this Wednesday, April 22nd, 2015. Joining me now from the UK is Paul Joseph Watson. We want to talk about a new article up today. JP Chase bans storage of cash in its safety deposit boxes. They now have an updated safe deposit box lease agreement that I guess is going to keep people from having cash. And of course, it was just yesterday we were talking about how Citibank's chief economist was saying we need to abolish cash. And he talks about the possible repercussions of that. Says, well, none of that should really bother us. Yeah, it might freak out the public. It might cause a panic. There might be massive disruptions. That shouldn't stop us from doing it. And of course, Bloomberg kind of laughs that off and says, well, that's not likely to happen. Don't worry. Of course, one of the other things that he was talking about was we could tax cash. Why would they do this? Well, of course, he prefaced all those remarks by the fact that they've had 0% interest rates for a long time. The economy is not recovering. In spite of what Obama is telling you, they wouldn't be talking about how they need to go to negative interest rates to get people to spend their money if it was doing as well as the Obama administration is saying it's doing. But they understand where it is. They want to try to stimulate the economy under the Keynesian model. They want to give you every incentive to spend and borrow. So they can't go any lower than zero unless they go to negative interest rates, charge you money to keep your cash in the bank. And of course, when that happens, people are just going to pull the cash out. They're going to hold cash. And so he says, so we can't let that happen. We have to abolish cash or we have to tax it away. So joining us now is Paul Joseph Watson. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, David. Good to be back.
Tell us about this story from JP Chase.
Well, this basically emerged yesterday. JP Chase customers received a letter at the beginning of the month which stated, quote, contents of the box, referring, of course, to the safety deposit box. You agree not to store any cash or coins other than those found to have a collectible value. And then in addition to this, basically banning the storage of cash in safety boxes, they also announced that they would make it more difficult for people to get access to their own safety deposit box, their own cash, their own valuables. They would have to bring in 2 forms of ID and then be issued with a 4-digit PIN number that will be used to access the box in future. On top of that, they also instituted a new policy which, quote, restricts borrowers from using cash to make payments on credit cards, mortgages, equity lines, and auto loans, which is basically illegal. You know, it says on the front of every dollar bill, as far as I know, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And that actually violates Uniform Commercial Code 3603, to refuse legal tender for repayment of a debt or a loan. So they're engaging in outright financial criminality with these new policy changes. And on top of that, saying that they will no longer allow people to store cash in safety deposit boxes.
Well, just another example of how they do whatever they want, regardless of what the law is. They could care less about what the law is. As you point out, if it says right on the bill, it's legal tender for any kind of debt that you pay out, but they say, we're not going to take that anymore. We're going to basically outlaw that. They do whatever they wish, don't they, Paul?
Exactly, and it's always to the detriment of the customer, it seems, despite the fact that, you know, they're the people investing in the bank. And it's this weird thing about how you mentioned at the start. They seem to have declared war on savers. And it comes back to the point that, you know, cash, free-flowing anonymous instruments of trade are a hindrance to control freaks who need to control that flow of capital and to confiscate wealth, which is eventually what it's all about. That's why they don't like cash, because, you know, it's harder to physically confiscate something if it's stored in a safety deposit box compared to erasing numbers on the screen. And we know that they've been preparing for bank runs in the aftermath of the next economic collapse, because in 2013, the FT reported that 2 major US banks, they were unnamed, had boosted their coffers, their ATM coffers, by 20 to 30%. So we know that they're expecting some form of bank run, as we've seen in numerous European countries over the past 5 years. And that's part of this whole war on cash.
Yeah, there's a lot of different aspects to it. I mean, of course, just one of them is this manic control, freak mentality to try to know everything about everybody, to build a full profile on people. I know we just recently this week, we tried to send some money to a relative. We had a neighbor who was going to deposit it into their bank account. We couldn't deposit a check. It wasn't even a cash. it wasn't a cash situation. We just wanted to have a check deposited into a relative's account, and they wouldn't let her do it because they have to track all the movement of money everywhere. And as you point out, cash is just one aspect of that, but it's this maniacal obsession with watching everything we do. And that's pervasive now in the government. And it's interesting, I think, Paul, that the more they want to know about us and the more they track us, the more jealously they guard everything that they're doing, especially the government, all of its government operations. Everything becomes a top secret operation now.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned your difficulty in, transferring that money. In 2013, we reported on how, again, Chase, they imposed these new restrictions which made it harder for people to make cash deposits into another person's account, while also operating an account with cash for an amount over $50,000 per cycle. So that would completely crush, small businesses, restaurants, places like that take a lot of cash. And again, I took out a lot of cash several years ago at Barclays, my bank, and you have to arrange a meeting with them over the phone in advance just to allocate this specific time where you can actually meet with someone and explain why you need to withdraw your own money. And in fact, it came out last year that HSBC, which of course has been caught laundering billions of dollars for all these drug kingpins, they can get away with that, but you need to be interrogated on what you do with your money. It was revealed that they were not only performing risk assessments if they didn't like your account activity, if they found it suspicious, but they were actually demanding documentation for what the money was to be spent on when you tried to go to the bank and withdraw anything over £3,000, which is about $5,000. And they actually, people went to the bank and they were shocked to be bombarded with all these questions about what they were going to do with their own money. After the uproar, they backed down on it, said it wouldn't be mandatory, but they would still ask customers questions about what they would do with their own cash. And several other banks that were contacted by the BBC said exactly the same thing. They said, we reserve the right to ask questions about what you're going to do with your own money, when it's none of their business what you're going to do with your own money. It was never their money to begin with. It's your cash. So it's about this intensification of invasiveness and this war on anonymity.
They're starting to show their true flags. They've hidden this behind the war on drugs, behind the war on organized crime for a very long time. All of this really began back with the RICO statutes, where they said that they could confiscate people's property before they actually found them guilty of a crime. They said, organized crime has the best lawyers money can buy. We can't get a conviction. Therefore, we need to confiscate their money before the trial so they can't hire these good lawyers so we can convict them. Everybody said, yeah, fine. Well, it didn't take very long before they started using that against abortion protesters, the RICO statutes and that sort of thing, and then extended it with civil asset forfeiture, where they could just basically say, your cash is, I think, involved in a crime, or this dog smells some cocaine on your cash, so we're just going to go ahead and take it. They also put in structuring issues in terms of saying that they're fighting money laundering. And of course, it was just recently that a deputy attorney general for the Justice Department was talking to this association. There's now an entire trade association around anti-money laundering activities. And he was telling them, we want you to report to law enforcement anybody that takes out $5,000 or more. So they vet your cash going in. And if they think that you are structuring your deposits to avoid a lot of onerous reports, they will confiscate your cash on that basis. And then after they've vetted it going in, they don't want you to take it out. If you take it out in a large amount, now you are a criminal suspect. That's the amazing thing. All these restaurant businesses that have legitimate uses of cash, they're getting their cash confiscated in several cases of that. There's a lady who had a restaurant business. She had $30,000 of cash that was confiscated. That sounds like a lot of money to a lot of people, but understand that's not all her money. She's just taking that in cash. She has a lot of expenses she has to pay, rent, payroll, supplies, so she's not keeping all that money. Nevertheless, they just take that money because they say, you got this much cash, you must be involved in a criminal action. Rand Paul and others who are now trying to put through the FAIR Act to stop civil asset forfeiture, one of the aspects of that is structuring to say you're not going to take people's cash just because they've got a lot of it. You have to show that it wasn't derived from a legitimate source, and people have a presumption of innocence. That's where we need to return to.
Yeah, and they're imposing those same measures in Europe to an even greater degree. The French finance minister, Michel Sapin, I think this was last month, the new regulations are going to come into force in September, but he hailed their introduction. This is a ban which will restrict French citizens from making cash payments over 1,000 euros. 1,000 euros. So, you know, if you're buying a vehicle on eBay or whatever, you're going to be banned from doing it. It's going to have to be tracked through the whole financial system. Again, in the name of anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, and suspicious activity. So it seems that the amounts are also coming down in terms of how much you can get out of your bank, how much you can pay in cash before it becomes a suspicious activity. And then the flip side of this, perhaps we can get into this after the break, is the fact that they're now openly saying they will confiscate people's savings to bail out banks in the future, which has now become basically a law in the European Union.
Yeah, actually, when Paul, this guy who was with the Justice Department, was talking to this Association of Money Launderers, he was actually talking about an initiative that they'd put together, a kleptocrat initiative, and they actually had an acronym for it. It was CARI, K-A-R-I. I think it's Kleptocrat Assets Recovery Initiative or something like that. We have a kleptocracy. I'll tell you about that when we come back. We'll be talking to Paul Joseph Watson about the war on cash and about our kleptocratic government that wants to know everything about you and take everything you have. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Last segment about the various things that have come to light in just the last couple of weeks. There was the Assistant Attorney General who went to the Anti-Money Laundering Trade Association, encouraging them to become snitches on people, report them for taking money out of the bank. They already thoroughly vet the cash going in. They're already using that as an excuse to confiscate cash that people have legitimately under the structuring laws. But he wants people to report if they see more than $5,000 of cash being withdrawn. But he also, Paul, talked about the Kleptocrat Asset Recovery Initiative, something like this called CARI. In that, Paul, he's bragging about the fact that they find these evil dictators, in other words, people that are not puppets of the American government. And wherever they see their assets, they confiscate them. They call these people kleptocrats, and they say, well, because we've labeled you a kleptocrat, I guess it's kind of like Manuel Noriega was labeled a strong man by George H.W. Bush. We'll label you as a kleptocrat. We'll just confiscate that person's assets wherever we find them. And I have to ask, who is the bigger kleptocrat? The biggest kleptocracy on the planet is the American government, isn't it, Paul?
Well, yeah, and the IMF recently announced a similar program targeting savers, but again, it's about labels. They could label anybody a kleptocrat. They could label anybody a money launderer. And in fact, in Europe, they label anyone with over 100,000 euros savings as wealthy. That's what they did in Cyprus, where they forced people to take a, quote, haircut, euphemism for wealth confiscation, of 47.5% of any of their savings over 100,000 euros. And they were, quote, taxing the wealthy. I mean, 100,000 euros that's basically a small business owner, somebody who could have just sold their house and got 100,000 euros in profit. That's not a wealthy person. That's ridiculous to even use that term. But now the EU has passed this law where they say the next bank bailout will be paid for by bondholders and savers. So again, anything over 100,000 euros will be swiped, will be confiscated. They already passed this law. They're pushing for similar laws in New Zealand, Canada, and other countries. So why in the hell would anybody want to have any significant amount of money in a bank when they've already promised, passed laws and already done it in some countries to swipe that money completely to anything over 100,000 euros?
Exactly. That's why they're not,
you're not making any interest on it to begin with. So why bother?
That's right. You said, why would anybody want to have their money in the bank? And that's precisely why Citibank, JP Morgan, and the government are conspiring together to find ways to outlaw cash, to abolish it, to get rid of it. One of the things, Paul, you said they can label anybody as a kleptocrat. They can find something on anybody, and that's really what's at the heart of them monitoring everything that we do. I mean, when we talked to Barrett Brown, remember, They labeled him as threatening an FBI agent when he quoted a death threat made by a Fox News commentator against Julian Assange. When he quoted that on Twitter, they said, "You're threatening an FBI agent." So they are constantly watching everything that you do. They can and they do misconstrue what you say or do as a false charge to confiscate your cash, to do anything that they want to you. That's really what's behind the constant police state. It's kind of like what Stalin, I think, said, bring me the man, I'll find the crime. If they want to get you because you're a political enemy, or if they think that you've got cash that they can steal, they will find a reason to do it. That's what's behind this constant surveillance about everything that we do.
Yeah, and they put people on terror watch lists for the most innocuous, reasons. What is it, over 1 million Americans?